Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
Dr. Dave Tilley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Chad, my man, I'm repping Vaughn today for you.
I saw that, man. The orange, the old school orange with what is that? I think it's blue silhouette and white writing.
I'm proud of my old school vintage first edition public.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this thing's a legend. This thing's legendary.
So old. We're gonna have to send you a Barbell Mobility t-shirt. We just got some of those in. We're trying to stay under control on that though. You know, we don't want to go too crazy with that kind of thing and eat too much into the income coming in, you know, but appreciate you joining me being the Barbell Mobility Podcast. Of course, we're going to talk about mobility, and you yourself are a physical therapist. And now one interesting fact that I want the folks to know about Dave Tilley is that he does not drink coffee. And because of that, I didn't trust you for many years, but I can, attest to your honesty and your intelligence and your ability. And I, even though you don't drink coffee, I completely trust you. So the listeners, I just want to put that out there. You can trust what he says here today.
Well, Chad, I actually have dabbled in the last 2 months again. Yeah. So after I think it's like 3.5 year hiatus, I weighed the pros and cons that I was sleeping and I was not healthy, but I enjoy a good cup of coffee with my friend at the coffee shop. And I really enjoy playing cards with my dad on like holidays and stuff, drinking coffee. So I am also buried in research projects right now and stuff with shifts. So I have here a small black coffee just for this moment. I saved them for things like this so I can be extra intelligent for you.
You have no idea how much that pleases me. I trust you even more. I'm even more excited for this recording for sure. But I was going to ask you, the first question is that, do you have the great mobility that you have because you don't drink coffee? So we don't even need to go there now because it's not true.
Nah, I was lucky with that from gymnastics, little God-given talent and genetics plus hardcore coach. So together, those two things got me good.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, you were a former gymnast in college, did a lot of collegiate gymnastics, and don't hold that against him either because he works with a lot of CrossFitters, a lot of weightlifters as a PT, and you've done
You said on a Power Monkey podcast that I moved the barbell well, and I almost peed myself with how excited I was. Like, Chad thinks I can snatch and clean and jerk. Okay.
Well, you do move a barbell very well. And the reason is because you have great mobility, great flexibility, and you've gotten into those extreme positions, the key positions for weightlifting, to solidify those ranges of motion that you have. And yeah, you look and you move very, very well. But, that being said, the topic that we're going to cover right now for this episode is just about mobility in general. How can someone improve their mobility, whatever area of their body is limited, or overall mobility, their body overall? What does the research currently say as to how that's best accomplished?
Yeah, I think when you and I were talking about you kicking this podcast off, I found mine was almost like an error on my side of the podcast is if you don't have some of these foundational concepts kind of laid out, it gets challenging as you get into deeper conversations about the shoulder or the hip or the ankle, because these things kind of universally apply. So I work in a lot, obviously gymnastics is an aesthetic sport. So mobility is a big part of it. But like you said, we work with a lot of CrossFitters. We work with a lot of Olympic weightlifters. We work with a lot of people who are interested in improving their mobility. So I just want to quickly share maybe some things that I've learned from reading a lot of the research and working with a lot of people. And then from there, hopefully that will help your listeners maybe have something to lean back on. So at the big picture, something that's really important to remember is that all joints in our body, they kind of have two main categories of things that make somebody mobile, right? So you have things that we call passive stabilizers, and then we have things that are more dynamic or active stabilizers, right? So passive things are the way your bones and joints are just inherently designed. And then everybody has, ligaments and joint capsules that are kind of around those joints. I always tell people that it's kind of like saran wrap wrapped around that joint, right? So your shoulder joint, you can picture like your shirt sleeve is that joint capsule. Generally speaking, you can't change those things because they're kind of the way you're born. They're kind of your genetics. And some people can develop with more time under tension, with more practice. They can increase those, particularly capsular things. But speaking from experience on a medical provider is you don't really want to mess with that kind of stuff. So that's kind of like one bucket. The thing you can change, which is what the majority of what people we give them for interventions and stuff are going to be these dynamic stabilizers. So muscles, right? Muscles, and the more particularly the passive range of those muscles, but also the stretch tolerance of those muscles, which comes together a little bit with your nervous system. And so I think that's kind of where most people can make really good, solid changes. So with that being said, if you look at the research on what seems to work to improve mobility, there's a couple studies that are really great. One is a systematic review from Thomas in 2018, which is a systematic review is just look at all the evidence, smush it all together in one study and try to get conclusions out of that, or a meta-analysis too. So what they found is that, different types of stretching do work if they're consistently done. So I think that is always what you and I at camp and many other people, I try to preach people is before you look up the best exercise on Instagram for front rack mobility, or you try to do the best program like crazy, get an assessment and then find something you can consistently do based off that assessment. And that's probably going to be the most important place to start. So the research in that study showed that 5 to 6 days per week was probably the most effective dose. Doing something, 2 sets of 30 seconds in those 5 to 6 days seems to be what makes progress, whether that's a static stretch, whether that's like a bottom position hold, whether that's a contract, relax stretch, whether that's some form of passive stretching where somebody like a kettlebell is helping you. I think that's the biggest thing to start with, is that the research supports assessments and consistently done mobility work is way better than anything else you're going to find as a hack or a trick or something like that. So that's really important to keep in mind. And then also there is really good support that eccentrics are very, very useful to try and help maintain mobility or to improve mobility. Within this kind of stretching or mobility bucket, generally we're either trying to make changes on the tissue itself. So maybe make muscles more relaxed or compliant over time to increase range of motion, or we're trying to change the nervous system's tone or tolerance to the discomfort of a stretch. The majority of the research now, I would say it's probably 75-25, suggests that consistent stretching work and mobility work is probably changing the resting tone of the muscle and also changing the tolerance to discomfort when you feel the stretch. And that's why you gain passive range of motion. There are some studies that show that consistent stretching and mobility work will change the length of a muscle over time or the stiffness of a tendon. But I think it's probably, again, more leaning towards the neurological side as of the research that I understand it right now. So a little bit of a mouthful there, but essentially we're trying to, consistently do something with stretching, eccentrics, and strength and conditioning balance technique, using those positions consistently. That's probably how you're going to make the most impact on your mobility.
Yeah, that's great. I'm excited to hear that. I of course hear you talk a lot, but I didn't know exactly what was going to come out of your mouth today. But as you threw all that out there, it excites me even more about what I'm trying to do with barbell mobility. And one, barbell mobility, as it stands, the app and what is purchased on a monthly basis is a general program. But it is focusing on the bottom position one day, start position, front rack, and then overhead. And the big thing about those mobility warm-ups that I'm giving out is that there are, general mobility drills that aren't necessarily individualized for anyone. But the big key there is that I am very frequently getting athletes into these key positions. And so for me, yes, I want to change the mobility for anyone that needs to change their mobility, and I want to improve it. But really more than that, it's about increasing their comfort. And so when you talk about neurological changes, to me, that's what comfort means, is you increasing your comfort and your ability to relax where you need to relax in these key positions. It's so important for weightlifting. It's so important for being under a barbell. So, to hear you say that, and that the research is leading to that is very exciting. Now, on the other end, of course, especially if you're limited significantly in any one area or 2 areas or 3 areas, however many areas you're extremely limited in, it's going to serve you better to individualize a little bit. And we're always working on other ways that we can incorporate some individualization, that we can direct athletes to individualization as needed, that they can use along with the the general overall barbell mobility program, it becomes very easy to plug individualized drills into that, or to do them alongside of that. Because again, remember that barbell mobility is so much about getting you into these key positions, getting you into the key positions in an exaggerated fashion, meaning that
Right.
if you, I'm not just going to put you in a snatch grip overhead squat, I'm going to put you in a narrow grip overhead squat, meaning whatever you can handle, but it's going to make it harder.
Right.
And then therefore, the more you do that, the easier and more comfortable you'll be with the snatch grip overhead squat. Or I'm going to have you hold a bar overhead and push back beyond the alignment of your head, again, exaggerating that position. We'll do the same thing for the front rack. We'll do the same thing for the bottom position, and we'll do the same thing for the start position. So exaggerated positions are very important for you to, again, improve that comfort as well. Now, one of the things that you said, of course, or a couple of things that you said, one, consistency. Again, yes, here's the thing. Like, I think if someone can consistently do a mobility program, yes, it matters some what they're doing, but I think I would rather them do that than not do anything at all. They're going to move their body through ranges of motion, and it's the more individualized it is, the better. But if you can get on a consistent routine and you can make that routine, again, then it becomes easier for you to make changes and experiment with other forms of mobility. And when you do come to the point to individualize, if you do, it's easier to add that to your program or your routine, because you're already used to doing something for mobility. So at least do something, right? But then off of that, on another note, you talked about eccentrics. So can you give us some examples of specifically what you're talking about there? Say for maybe one example for each of the key positions that we're talking about. Bottom position, what is an eccentric that we can use to assist in improving that position, or an area of the body, say the ankle, or whatever may be limited on the individual, to help them improve that specific part of the body, to therefore improve the bottom position?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of circling back to a point you made that's really good, is that consistency. Well, you and I obviously would love everyone to have that individual program. The reality is that because of your experience and because of what we know about these patterns, there are certain muscle groups or certain positions that you need to just train every day to be successful, right? And so, like, the starting position, right? Like, we know the posterior chain, the hamstrings, and some of that hinging motion is going to be really important. So if your goal is to pull from the floor, you probably need to make sure you work that consistently every day, which is one of the benefits to your program. Is like, of course, you could get in the weeds about specifics, but like, to have a consistent program that you can just open up and do every single day, to know you're getting the right things you need, that's super important, right? Especially on someone on a busy schedule. So I just want to mention that. But yeah, so
no, yeah. Let me just let me add to that real quick, because you make a great point, and one that I meant to make as well, is that if you are getting into these key positions and you're moving through full ranges of motion, there's individualization there already.
Right.
Because you're going, like, if you're pausing in the bottom of a squat, whether that's, if you're very limited in the bottom of the squat, honestly, an air squat isn't the best one to do to help you change your mobility. You need some weight, you need some assistance, which is why, we do a lot of the things that we do. But let's just say you're pausing in the bottom of a front squat. Wherever you're limited, as long as you're at those end ranges, you're going to be working on the most limited parts of your body. That's where the stress is going to go, and that's where the changes is going to be made. And that's why we do a combination of getting you into your normal regular position, but also making it harder, but also making it easier. So we do a lot of elevated heel squats, with front overhead, or any bottom position drill that you're going to see. There's going to be 2 inches of elevation indicated, or 1 inch, no elevation. We do some for those that can handle it with your toes elevated. Again, that's making it harder, but because you're making it easier, normal, and harder, you get a good range of ensuring that you're getting to a depth with quality, at least on some of your reps, where you can help improve the mobility of the parts of your body that you need to improve.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I'll promise I'll come back to eccentrics, but you're just making so many good points that
you're good.
I agree with you that I think in the coaching in the medical world, sometimes there's this concern about exaggerated positions with warm-ups and stuff, but you have to realize that we are trying to encourage exaggerated positions because it's no load. You're not putting
Yeah.
315 on your
Right.
back, right? So
Right.
we're safe to do this, but also someone's goals are to clean and snatch and to do whatever else it is. We're trying to prepare their body for the worst possible scenario,
Yeah.
right? Because you and I know that when you are 90+% and above, you're going to be forced into your full range of
Yeah.
motion by the weight. And so I use a lot of your warm-ups that I learned 5 or so years ago with exaggerated toe positions and stuff
Yep.
for patients, medical patients who are coming back,
Mhm.
and you can see them struggle with depths or struggle with their feet position because when you're warming up, it's like an insurance policy we're trying to build that, like you taught me before, if you start outside your feet hip width with your toes turned out, and then you try to squat and you jump further, and now you're in an exaggerated, not so great position. Well, we need to try to break down the pieces, flexibility wise to get you there. But then the warm up, try to go exaggerated if you're comfortable there, so that when you are put into a position of compromise, you're going to be more in a narrow envelope there where you can work. So I think it's important for people to realize that those exaggerated positions, if they're appropriate, are building that consistency, but also we're trying to build your insurance policy around some of these
Yes.
positions. And again, we've had long discussions about this. This is for people who have goals that want these things. And so that's
Yes.
what we're trying to do, right? It's not always appropriate to give someone a super low front squat if they're like, I never want to clean. It's like, okay, well, you're not in our bucket of wheelhouse. That's fine. Enjoy your life, have fun. But a lot of people that you and I work with come
Yeah.
to us with the goals of cleaning, jerking, and snatching. And so I think it's important to clarify that, because a lot of medical providers don't understand why we promote these extreme positions and exaggerated positions, and they kind of bark at us a little bit. But it's like, well, people have goals to clean heavy, and so we're trying to
Right.
promote that. But all right, back to eccentric.
Yes. Yes. Oh, we could talk. I mean, I could just go back and forth with you forever on that. So yeah, let's branch off and get to the eccentrics now.
Sure. Yeah. So back to the conversation of, what are we doing? How are we trying to change the tissue? We have that kind of changing the nervous system, and then we have changing the actual tissue itself. And I will not go way down the rabbit hole here. I'll keep it pretty non-geeky, but essentially most of the things that we think are affecting, right? So stretching, soft tissue work, consistent stuff, all that, most of it is changing the nervous system's tolerance to those end ranges and stretches, the discomfort of stretch. They're called nociceptors, right? So people who are trying to find digger here, or trying to dig in deeper here. But there is evidence that stretching and other things do affect the actual tissue length itself and the actual tendon length and some of the capsular motion itself. So you can change that a little bit. It's debated, but it's probably a little bit of both, right? Nothing is black or white. So with that being said, one thing I think we have some decent support of theoretically to change the mechanical tissue is really good strength and conditioning programs, but particularly eccentric contractions, because there's a really good review by O'Sullivan in 2013 in BJSM, I think, and there's been a couple of recent papers showing this too. But there seems to be something about elongated positions of contraction, which is what an eccentric contraction is, that is probably either just like stretching on steroids, right? It's overload to that stretching position. It's exaggerating the end range position, or again, don't want to go down the rabbit hole. There are some thoughts that the tension through the muscle and through the tendon complex are causing some what are called epigenetic changes for the body to adapt into that elongated position. So maybe that tension is causing some sort of change where your body's like, whoa, this is pretty intense. We want to try to build something to build more tolerance against this. But eccentrics and the protocol that Dan Pope and I usually use with people and we teach at Power Monkey Camp is some sort of loaded motion for 5 repetitions of a 5-second lower with a 5-second bottom position hold, trying to do a couple sets of those every day. And again, there's not a ton of great research. We have some good research studies in like Romanian deadlifts with overload to barbell RDLs, and we have some other stuff on hamstrings for that. But we try to extrapolate that data and apply it to the things that we think make a difference, and we use tests and measures to see if we're making progress. So I think you said what, bottom position, starting position, bottom, receiving position, overhead, and front rack are the 4 you guys kind of go for. Yeah.
Right.
So if we talk about the starting position, right, you need a really good hinge, and you need quite a bit of posterior chain or hamstring mobility. So that would be a really good situation where a Romanian deadlift maybe out of the rack, or if you can have somebody help you, right, you would unrack it and you would do a 5-second lower of a stiff-legged RDL, 5-second lower to the position where you feel as though it's quite a bit of tension, but also you're not compromising your back position or something like that. You would hold that bottom position for 5 seconds, and then maybe you would either have friends pick it up, or you would squat it back up, or you do pick it up. But the lowering 5 seconds is really what you're going for. So you could do that with a barbell double leg deadlift. We also like doing this sometimes with a kickstand or a single leg RDL if someone's really stiff on one side of their leg versus the other. So we do those quite a bit. For the bottom position hold, I think usually the best go-to one is a goblet squat. Mm-hmm. So you would goblet squat, 5 second lower, 5 second hold at the bottom, again, with a position that feels comfortable for you, slightly exaggerated. You would, hold that for 5 seconds at the bottom position with really good tension, put the kettlebell down on the floor, deadlift that back up and pull it back up to the clean position and start in a goblet. So you're just riding the eccentric all the way down, but that will help establish the bottom position. And I think, as I've learned from you, we do a lot of holds at the bottom where you're holding the rack and you're pulling your feet forward, which is awesome for the ankles and stuff. But it seems to be that overload of the goblet squat for some reason helps that bottom position.
Yeah,
that would be 2. For the overhead position, I mean, this is not new to some of the listeners, but like eccentric chin up lowers or lat long are really, really good for us. So jumping up to a chin up bar in a curled up position, reverse grip to make the lats be on tension with a dumbbell between your feet. 5 second lower, 5 second bottom hold. That's one of Dave Durani's favorites. And then for the front rack position, it gets a little bit trickier here, but we do like doing some front rack, like push press eccentric lowers, right? So find a grip and a width that's good for you, push jerk or push press up some weight, and then do a 5 second lower all the way down, and then hold that front rack position at the bottom. That's good for a couple of reasons. One is that eccentric pressing is really good to build the cuff strength and build up like your front rack strength in general, but also that can be a helpful eccentric overload to the front rack position, pending that, you find a grip width that's comfortable. It's not going to feel like your elbows are exploding when you start. You don't want to exaggerate too much to start with because you can sometimes stress the inside of the elbow, but generally you can find a comfortable position.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that you've got my wheels turning now. You might need to add a little bit more of that into the barbell mobility program. In general, we do a lot of chin up negatives in the program on a fairly frequent basis. But certainly for anyone that I've worked with, who has especially specific lat tightness, maybe is their main area of limitation for their front rack or overhead. It's something that I would give them on a more regular basis. We do a lot of in the program, I think you call them the hamstring leg lowers. Yep. In the barbell mobility program, they're called hamstring leg lifts. So where those are, we're wanting you to move slower, but then pairing those with either just a regular Romanian deadlift with the bar, with the kettlebell, or single leg Romanian deadlifts, and with those indicating, a 3 to 5 second lower with the 3 to 5 second hold in your stretch position. And again, when I'm saying your stretch position, I'm talking about where you can get where you're feeling a stretch, but without, bending the knee too much and or rounding the back any at all. So you're in that quality position. But yeah, a lot of that stuff, I think just by nature is in the program, but I think something we could look into and step up a little bit more. And one of the things that I do for my right ankle, I've talked about this I think I talked about this with Dr. Aaron Horschig when we covered ankle, but I'll do a combination of rolling out the bottom of my foot, and then 5 to 10 ankle rocks, either with or without a band, depending on what I have access to, and then I'll do 10 calf raises. So this is similar to what you're talking about, but now again, you got me thinking. I think I could add some slow eccentric to those calf raises, maybe do 10 calf raises and then do a slow eccentric down to the in range, 5 seconds, 5 second hold there, and then maybe 5 to 10 more ankle rocks, and then go into the squat drill that I'm using. Yep.
That's worth adding here too, is I think it's really good sometimes to do the one-legged variations because you can focus more on that eccentric, right? So if you do a kickstand deadlift, you can kickstand RDL down with 2 heavy kettlebells or a barbell, put your other foot down and concentrically stand up on 2 legs, right? So you're just focusing on the negative. And the other thing that just popped into my mind that's really good too is I enjoy sometimes if someone really struggles with, sometimes people have like one really stiff shoulder or one really stiff elbow when they try to front rack. So that's the bottleneck when they do their barbell work. But you can also do this with kettlebells or dumbbells. So you could put 2 kettlebells and you could push jerk and do a negative on each side, because that will free up a little bit more side to side asymmetry. So a lot of people struggle with one versus the other. And you made a really good point that something I'm a big fan of, even in the gymnastics world, which has got some archaic flexibility methods, is I think rather than doing 3 straight sets of passive stretching and waiting for 5 minutes to work on that. Obviously the research supports that, but there's so many things the research support around that. So you're probably better off picking one thing or one drill you really know helps for you and doing those in a little bit of a circuit, right? So a little soft tissue to the bottom of the foot, a little bit of the calf raises, a little bit of the bottom squat hold, because you're trying to encourage a lot of different ways to make that mobility stick. So that's what I teach people too quite a bit as well, is there's definitely a role for, some straight sets, but I would rather see someone do, like you said, roll for 30 seconds and then do 5 eccentric lowers and then do some sort of an ankle rocker at the wall and then go do a bottom goblet hold for 5 reps. You're probably going to dip into the research of what everything might be working for and smush those together. The net gain is probably a little bit more effective there.
Absolutely. And I believe that so much. And I feel like it's what I've seen, a lot of the stuff that I've learned from you and Pope at camp that I've, incorporated into my teaching and the mobility drills that I give athletes, but it's always, I mean, at the end of some of my programs, I'll have like a mobility cool down where there might be some smashing or something like that. But I'm starting to even there get into, if I'm doing 2 different smashing drills or whatever the type of mobility I'm using at the end of the workout is, I want to pair that with a movement. So whether it be a light Romanian deadlift, or even just 5 air squats, anything to help the body, I believe, uptake the drills that you just did. So instead of just leaving them alone, but anyone that's been on the barbell mobility program and have done any amount of those warm-ups know that that's basically all it is just circuits. It's circuits of, pairing mobility drills with specific movement or with specific holds in the front rack or the overhead. Maybe that's only in the standing position for the day. Or maybe it's only you holding the bottom position instead of doing air squats on a day, but it's always a circuit. And I believe in the strength of that so much, to help people, again, make the changes if you need to make change. But again, more than anything, is about comfort and the ability to relax where you need to relax, and all those things that we're looking for. We want to help individuals. What you do on a daily basis, Dave, is you want to help individuals, for you, be out of pain, to be able to move and do the things that they want, but to ultimately reach their goals, not only reach their goals, but reach their potential, because your actual potential may be higher than the goals that you have,
Sure.
and that's the thing. And all that stuff, that's what all this is about, is helping individuals reach their potential. I'm passionate about mobility in this part of the game. And I know that a lot of weightlifting coaches that I've talked to are confident in their ability to teach weightlifting, to teach technique, to program, but they feel they're a little limited in this area. So this is something that, just like ROM Water Go Wad, that you can add to the program that you're on without needing to change anything, just 10 minutes, or any mobility that you need, or anything extra that you need to do. It's not a knock on your coach. It is just, what we're finding out with CrossFit athletes, weightlifting athletes, gymnastics athletes, is that maybe you need more than one source to help you be the best that you can be. It takes a, what do they say? It takes a tribe, and I think that's true for anybody and anything that you're trying to do. And looking back on my career, I can certainly see that it took more than just me, myself, and one coach. There was multiple coaches that I came across through my career that taught me different things, that helped me become the athlete that I could be. My family, my friends, all those things need to come together. So pay attention to this area, mobility in general, and this overall overview that we had here, Dave. I loved. And before we wrap it up, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think just summarizing, all the main points is like you just so well illustrated, is sometimes I think people unfortunately are doing a little bit, it's a shotgun approach and not a sniping approach. And they sometimes get really frustrated here. And so I think for me in the encouragement of you in the program stuff is because you have to realize, and we see this all the time at camp, is that sometimes if you just took a step back and figured out the bottleneck of one thing that might be holding you back, like you said, to your potential, we see a lot of times that people are spinning their wheels and are frustrated because they don't have a direct line of attack to that one thing that's problematic. So I think we see that a lot. And my buddy, Nick Ruddick, who's a really high level gymnastics coach on the international stage, we talk about like the basics of the basics, right? Like you have your positions and you have your skills, but what are the basics to get into those positions? And so say, for example, if your shoulder mobility is the thing that's limiting you, if we could take a step back and just figure out, with a good warm-up program and a consistently done program, if we can improve your shoulder soft tissue mobility by 10%, well, maybe that's going to improve your front rack position and that will improve your overhead position. Well, you just got a much better clean position receiving. You got a much better jerk position to start, and you get a much better overhead receiving position for your jerk when you actually catch it. That's a huge potential increase there because you found the common denominator. And so I think that's where people should think about this, is not as one more thing, as you said. It's like, well, we're trying to find the bottlenecks here. We're trying to find, and if you're a CrossFit athlete, it also helps with your overhead position and your handstands and your toes to bar and everything, right? So like working with that tribe and finding the couple things that are really problematic for you is like, you always talk about that one thing, right? What's that one thing that I can get at? For some people, it's a baseline level of my shoulder can't move enough to get in the position that I want. And that's where a coach gets frustrated. It's like, I would love to program more for you and help you more, but like every time we get to this point, your technique and stuff gets limited by this one bottleneck, the basic of the basics. So take it as an opportunity to maybe fix that one thing and see everything else improve. Absolutely.
Love it. Love it. What are you currently most excited about, kind of in your career? Anything that you're working on specifically, or what's going on?
I'm really, really fortunate that the position that I'm at with Shift, and particularly in gymnastics, is, I don't know how I got here, but a lot of important people value my opinion for some really hard problems in gymnastics situation right now. So we have 3 or 4 research projects that we just kicked off and that are actively going right now that I think are going to be very potentially impactful for the sport. So one on workloads, one on Achilles ruptures, and a couple more that we're starting about like rehab protocols. So it is one of the reasons I started drinking coffee again, because I have quite a bit of work to do, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to make a positive impact with research and with the college and in the elite programs that hopefully the next generation of kids growing up will be a little bit more better off. So very flattering. I don't get paid for it. So it's a lot of good faith and will work, but it's the right thing to do. And so I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Love it. Well, I want to do is take this concept of being consistent, of course, and mobility in general, but for one specific area of the body, for one specific position. And the position we're going to cover today are the shoulders, specifically for overhead mobility and overhead positioning. So first of all, Dave, tell me why it's important for overhead barbell athletes, or even overhead athletes, meaning a gymnast that's getting into a handstand, doing handstand walks, whatever that may be. Why is it important to have good shoulder mobility, good shoulder flexibility? And then kind of how does that relate to stability, shoulder stability?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time somebody asked me to help them with overhead positions, I'd probably be retired by now. Right. Yeah. So like, this is something that is commonly, a lot of people want to work on it. A lot of people want to improve it because it correlates to a lot of different skills that many people want to work on, right? Whether it's, like you said, gymnastics, CrossFit athlete, weightlifting athlete, everybody has this overhead position. And so I think it's important for 2 reasons. And contrary to maybe what people know about my life on the medical side, I actually usually start the conversation about performance, right? I think more people, including myself, just want to help people reach their goals and whatever they want to, achieve. I think that we have to realize that improving mobility or improving your overhead position is probably going to be performance-wise what's going to get you to the next level for a lot of people, right? So we could talk about a recreational everyday weightlifter who just wants to go to the gym twice a week and get away from their busy life with their kids, and they just want to lift weight because it makes them feel good, right? They're probably going to plateau in how much weight they can get overhead, or how they can finish a clean and jerk, or their position with snatching, if their shoulder mobility is stuck. And if they don't have that last 10 degrees to really stack weight well over their head, those maybe inconsistencies or some of those technical development pieces are going to be exposed when they start to get to their heavier weights, or when they're trying to do some things over and over. So there's that one end of the non-competitive everyday human who just loves weightlifting because it makes them feel good and it's awesome. Those people are literally the exact same situation as some people we've been fortunate to work with who are international weightlifters trying to get 1 kilo more on the bar so they can win a spot on a national team and go to the Olympics, right? those same exact things is that to have the maximal amount of weight over your head, you're going to need flawless overhead positions because that is how the body can handle stress most optimally. So it's kind of this extreme performance, whether performance for you is health and wellness and just loving working out, CrossFit, gymnastics, whatever, or it's the extreme end of I'm trying to be the top 0.001% in my field and win a gold medal. So for performance goals, you're gonna see this show up, right? And you could say it's a one rep max lift for an Olympic weightlifter or someone, but also the CrossFit athlete. I think I talked to Dave and everybody else at camp, even last camp, about this. Think about if you had 5% missing overhead mobility, every power snatch you catch in a 30 rep workout, or every time you have to handstand walk, or every time you have to do chin-ups or chest to bars, you're going to be just that much more energy inefficient. You're going to be putting out just a little bit more energy than you probably should to stabilize the barbell overhead for all those push jerks or all those handstand walks versus being technically sound and having good positions and being efficient. When, shit hits the fan down the road in that last 2 minutes of the workout. Sorry if this is a PG friendly podcast, but when you have 2 more minutes of the workout, right, and you have just a little bit more gas in the tank than somebody else, you're going to probably be okay, right? Because you haven't blasted yourself apart. So that's kind of the one side of it. The other side of it is the injury prevention and the health performance rights, right? Having better positions allows the stress to be optimally shifted across your body. So if you have really crummy overhead position or you're constantly, unstable, you might be stressing your rotator cuff just a little bit more. You might be stressing your labrum just a little bit more. You might be putting more pressure on the nerves and the discs of your neck because your head is forward when you catch. And that's going to catch up with you probably when all that stress exceeds your capacity. So if you look at some of the best athletes in weightlifting, CrossFit, gymnastics, they are absolutely disciplined and meticulous about maintaining their range of motion and position, but also building strength at those end ranges and trying to be really good overhead. So yeah, that's the long-winded answer to the performance side, but then also the health and the injury risk side.
Perfect. One thing that I want the listeners to take note of is you talked about, the head poking through when you're holding a barbell overhead. And a lot of athletes do that. And what this means is that they're pushing their head through as much as they possibly can. And this is just a side note, by the way, just something I want to tackle and pick on real quick.
But it matters, sir. It matters.
Yeah, that they are pushing their head through, ducking their head down as much, seemingly as much as they can, and pushing the bar back as far as they can. And I think that, most of the athletes that I've come across feel like it's something that they have to do because they have had limited overhead mobility or comfort, either stemming from the shoulder, the upper back, or whatever it's stemming from. It's, they're taking this too far. And so for me, the first part of it before trying to really assess and change their mobility, if that's what needs to happen, is getting them to understand that they don't have to do that. Let's pull the head back and let's pull the bar forward a little bit to align them better, so that now you're immediately, once you get some reps in and you find a feel for it, you're immediately in a stronger, more stable position, in a more comfortable position. I'm not going to say it fixes everything immediately, but I think before we have the discussion about mobility for your shoulders, specifically for overhead, how about you assess your position? Or do you feel like you have to duck your head through and push the bar back as hard as you can? Is that how you are doing your overhead squats and your snatches? And it's kind of goes back to what you talked about with efficiency and fatigue. Like if you're doing that on every single rep, whether it's one rep or multiple reps in a CrossFit workout, you're kind of wasting too much energy, right? So let's fix that. And then let's, look at your mobility and make some changes there if needed.
Right. Yeah. And there's a really good point here that I think we have to highlight with overhead positions and this kind of situation of head position and shoulder position. I've had some really long discussions with Mike Cerberus and you and Aaron and Dan about this, of what you might see an elite level weightlifter do at an Olympic competition because he's trying to get 1 more kilo than his competitors versus what is optimal and what is maybe a compensation, right? So when you go overhead, if you don't have the range of motion you need to go overhead, there are some common compensations that happen. One of which is the head may dip really far forward because the bar needs to be back over your head. And in your brain, you're like, well, the bar is behind my head relative to where I want to be, but your forward head might be really, really significant, right? Also, one we see quite a bit in some of the highest level lifters is a very deliberate internal rotation of the shoulders very, very far in to try to get, that last end range. And there's a very big difference between what is a compensation because you are missing overhead position and what is a deliberate technical, skill set that your coach has given you to get like 0.001% more better, right? So I think that's what we've decided, and we've kind of consensus statement between all of us is like, we're trying to teach what is the most optimal way to be healthy and do what you want to do. And then if you get to the very tip top of your game and you're talking about the elite international stage, maybe yes, that very deliberate internal rotation, that very deliberate head forward position, because it works for you, it's going to be different. But the majority of people, 99% of people, the forward head, the very exaggerated internal rotation, the widening of the hands, that is probably not optimal. It's probably not a good situation. And we'd like to break that down and try to figure out, how do we get your improved overhead position to be better? And then we can clean up some technical things, because I would personally rather see, from a health point of view and a performance point of view, and I think all of us agree, stacking the shoulders with a more armpit forward position and a more relative head back and a more comfortable bar stack is probably better for clean and jerks and snatches in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I would agree. I mean, of course, these, topics that we're covering now, talking about shoulder rotation with the bar overhead, and I really like to look at that as more how the arm is twisted. Is your arm twisted forward or rotated? Is your arm rotated forward, or is your arm twisted or rotated back?
Yep.
And I want it to be twisted or rotated back as much as possible. And, I think in the community in general, we talk about that being external or internal shoulder rotation, but correct me if I'm wrong, if your arm is overhead, whether the arm is twisted forward or back, isn't the shoulder in more of an externally rotated position anyway? So just kind of a side note there. But how is your arm twisted overhead? And if you're going to emulate the best lifters in the world, I mean, writing a book right now, I mean, I'm in the process, and you know how that is, Dave. Like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get this done? But what I do with the majority of my day when I'm writing is I'm confirming what I'm saying by watching videos, looking at pictures. So I'm looking at the best lifters in the world for a large portion of the day, every day right now. And I've been doing that for years and trying to write this book and put out the best product that I can. But what I can tell you is that, yes, there are some that are, I would say, with their arm extremely rotated forward or twisted forward, where the bend of the elbow is pointing forward. But that's, man, less than 1%, I would say, are at that extreme. Most of them are going to be with it twisted all the way back or in more of a mid position. So, maybe only partially completely twisted forward, because to be extreme in that twist forward position is pretty weak and unrealistic for heavy load to have that overhead. And again, most of them aren't exaggerated with their head ducked very far forward. Most of them are in a much better alignment, like very close to bar being in line with the back of the head is where most of the elite lifters are, I would say. So if we go back and say, what, like you talked about, what is a compensation and what is purposeful and what is kind of ideal, again, even if we look at most of the best in the world, even if they're exaggerating a little bit in those two areas, it still isn't too extreme. And again, the biggest percentage of them are more twisted all the way back with the arm or very close to it, and with the bar in line with the back of the head or very close to it. So just something to keep in mind there as well.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. So went off on a few tangents there, which is beautiful and lovely, but that leads us into the next part of this, which is, for you as a physical therapist, what leads you to initially assess shoulder mobility? Is it something that you just do in general anyways, or is there something, a specific compensation or compensations that lead you to that?
Yeah. So generally people, when they come to us with issues, they're either performance issues or they're in pain, right? Those are the two reasons that usually someone seeks out my services. And so generally when I talk to that person, they're telling me, I get to like 85, 95% of my lifts and I can never quite get through to my next, level of jerk position, or my coach always says the bar is slightly more forward, and that's why I'm catching things out the front, right? Or something performance wise is why they're struggling, right? Or they come and they say like, my wrist really bothers me, my shoulders really hurt after I do a heavy jerk day, or I can't quite get through handstand workouts, or in a gymnastics point of view, their skills are sore or painful. So that generally is why they come to me. And then we always check a pretty comprehensive full body movement assessment in anyone who comes, because we try to provide that as our system. But we're checking someone's head position and some arm position overhead. And we'll see those compensations usually pop out. We'll watch a video or a lift, or we'll watch them do something, and we'll see those compensations. Or we'll see when they move their arms overhead that they don't have the basic, 180 degree of shoulder overhead position that you probably need for sports. So we'll see the head dip forward. We'll see the arms go wide. We'll see the armpits turn in. We'll see the elbows bend. We'll see some of these things. We'll see someone's torso be pitched forward in a snatch when they can't quite receive well. So these are all key indicators to us that we have to break these things down. And what we do from a medical assessment is we look at the different things that can contribute to limited, overhead position. So the first one that most people miss, honestly, is thoracic spine position. That's really, really important because that drives where your shoulder blades go, which drives where your arms go. So we look at that first. And then the next piece of that is breaking down, as we talked about in the first episode, is in our shoulder joint, we can break it out into passive things and active things. So we always want to make sure and check that someone's like capsular position is okay, which is very, very rare for someone to have capsular issues. If they're a little bit older, they're maybe getting into barbell work for the first time as like a 30, 40, 50-year-old, which we highly encourage, right? But if someone who's typically a little older or has an old injury, they might have some capsular issues, but 95% of people fall in the the active flexibility, which is like muscles, right? So, and then there's another kind of breakdown in the tree, which is what muscles can limit overhead position. So it'd probably be useful if I just go through those step by step versus like, making it too confusing. Is that cool?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So we always try to break down, okay, what's the thing we're looking at? What's the screen? What can we do about it? Right. That's kind of we want to prove to ourselves as scientists that this is the problem they have. So thoracic spine position, you need to have somebody extend their thoracic spine and rotate their thoracic spine to get good overhead position, because when the upper back is extended, the shoulder blades can tip backwards and rotate out. And that can mean your arm can be in a good stacked position overhead, right? If you don't have the upper back extending, the shoulder blades will probably tip more forward and inward, and that might push the arms forward. So we check thoracic spine flexibility by doing a press up test, laying on your stomach, pressing up and seeing if they have an even curve all the way in their upper back. If we can see that curve reversal, but also you can sit on the corner of something and try to turn your body 50 degrees in each side. We want to see the collarbones rotate 50 degrees each way. And that gives us a general idea that you have enough passive range of motion to, get your arms overhead from a thoracic spine point of view. If you don't have that, many of the exercises people know, getting over a medicine ball with a dumbbell behind your head, doing some windmills, doing some hands and knees turns, you want to work on that quite a bit. But that's usually what some people miss, and they jump right to like, shoulder stuff. So I would check that out first. And then the next piece past that is, if you suspect you have some capsular stiffness or you have an old shoulder injury or you're a little older, there are some medical assessments that a PT or an AT or a sports chiropractor can do to just test the joint glides out. And I'm going to skip over that because it's really not something that somebody should mess with on each other. Most people don't have that problem. But if you are someone who you broke your shoulder, you had an old shoulder surgery, you have something where you're older, you have diabetes and you're trying to get past that, you can check into that and see, but most people don't have that problem. The next thing you look at is you want to make sure that the shoulder joint, the muscles around the shoulder joint that commonly limit flexibility are all checked off the box. And as a tangent, Dan and I and you and some other people have talked about how in like sports like baseball and gymnastics, we have good research that repetitive motions make some of these muscles very stiff. And because CrossFit is new and maybe the medical side of weightlifting is very new with this, we are finding in a lot of athletes who we work with year round at the highest level that just doing the sport itself can get some adaptive stiffness of these muscles, but also the repetitive nature of some things in CrossFit, weightlifting, and gymnastics make certain muscles very prone to stiffness, right? So the lats, teres major in particular, if you're really good keeping the barbell close to you, you're going to have lat firing all the time, and teres is going to be really pulling. So it's common, and I don't want to name drop, but we've worked with some really high level weightlifters who I've seen over the course of 2 years working with them get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer because of how hard they pull the bars to their body when they clean and when they snatch, because they have great technique. Same thing with gymnastics, same thing with CrossFit, all the toes to bar, the rope climbs, the leg lifts, all that kind of stuff maybe makes the lat and teres really, really overactive. So that's kind of the reason maybe someone is having this combination of repetitive overuse, but also maybe their strength programming is not balanced enough to make sure they get enough of pushing and pulling ratio. But that sets somebody up to have some of these muscles be stiff. And the four biggest ones that I have yet to treat: a weightlifter, a CrossFit athlete, a gymnast who doesn't have something from a muscular point of view stiff here, if mobility is an issue. The biggest one being the lat, latissimus dorsi, and the second most biggest one being the teres major. And then past that, maybe the long head of the triceps, the subscapularis, and the pecs. Those five, sorry, not four, usually are something in those five categories. If the thoracic spine is not an issue, the neck and thoracic spine is not an issue, and they still can't go to overhead passively, It's probably one of those 5 things. And so before I talk about screening those, is there anything you want to follow up on? Because I feel like I'm talking way too much.
No, you're good. This is great. I think, the big thing that that I took from that I think is probably fair to say is that if an athlete is going to perform a weightlifting program, let's say, for years, and they're working to be the best weightlifter that they can be, or whatever goals that they may have, they're working towards those. And here's the thing: by nature, weightlifting, the snatch and the clean and jerk, and the exercises that you should be doing to support that, and the ranges that you should be getting into to support that, there's mobility work in there. So you're going to maintain a certain level of mobility just by being on a weightlifting program. If you have good technique, if you're squatting all the way down and pausing in the bottom of your squat and holding certain key positions the way that you should. But at the same time, if you're only doing those movements over and over and over again, it sounds like you're saying there are certain parts of the body that may stiffen up over time. That makes it more important for you to be doing side work, mobility work or position work with light weights and exaggerating these positions. Again, we'll talk more about exaggerated positions more later, and we talked a lot about that in the previous recording that we did. But with what you're saying there, it excites me because it makes it more important for athletes to do these short sequences on a regular basis, to exaggerate, to get some mobility work in, to make sure that you're not just constantly tightening a little bit here and a little bit there over time, because you're never exaggerating, and all you're doing are just the movements that, yes, by nature do have mobility work in them, but at the same time, your body will lock to those ranges, into those positions, into those actions that you're constantly doing. My front rack position is a good example of that. And I will tell you that because I'm doing front squats with straps a lot, which is an exaggerated exercise that is in the Barbell Mobility program all the time, because I'm working on that position and doing certain drills like smashing my triceps, because my triceps have tightened over the years of doing my front squats and my jerks out of my fingertips as opposed to a full grip. And now that's not a wrong thing to do. Like, that's a legitimate technique and a legitimate style to use for cleans, for jerks, if you choose to do that. But what I was missing in my career is only doing that and never doing some full grip front squats or some front squats with straps. And so my body absolutely molded to that position and that action that I was doing, which taught me a very, very valuable lesson. And so that's just one example, I think, of what you're talking about there.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good point you make, is that we see this all the time. And we're really lucky at our facility in Boston that we see people year round, and we also see them for sports performance goals, not just injuries, right? So when you see someone across an entire competitive season, it gives you a different appreciation for how their body changes in a normal response to their competitive season or their demands. And so you want someone to be sport specific in some of their adaptations, right? Like, it's going to happen that weightlifters get maybe some stiffness in their lats and some stiffness in their upper body, because it helps them pull the bar more effectively and it helps them stack their positions well. But we're always teaching people that we don't want to let that sport specific adaptation get so far down the continuum that it starts interfering with other positions, right? In this example of holding the barbell really close to you and keeping it close to your hip and pulling it into your hip for triple extension, it's great if you have really, really strong lats to do that as the weight gets heavier. But it's not good if that lat tightness and teres tightness starts to then negatively affect your overhead position.
Right.
We see this in gymnastics too. We see this in CrossFit. So we want to keep it within a buffer here of sport specific to be advantageous, but not so sport specific and extreme that it starts to cause pain or injury, or you can't catch your lifts well. So that's kind of where this concept comes from. My boss taught me this with Major League Baseball players, watching to see how they change over a season. I see this with gymnasts and CrossFit and weightlifters. So that's the concept we're trying to apply here.
Absolutely. Love it. And another thing that I love that you said before we get into the other stuff that you were heading towards is you talked about, the conversations about shoulders, but I love that you said before shoulders comes T-spine, right? So what you're saying is that there's a priority there. And if your T-spine is tight in certain ways or in general with the test that you explained, then you're probably spinning your wheels and wasting your time working on the shoulders specifically. And to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that's true for, say, if we go further down the body and talk about the ankles.
Mm-hmm.
So if your ankles are really, really stiff and really, really tight, it's going to cause issues. Is it up or down the chain? I always get that confused, but yeah, it's going to cause issues up the chain. So it may need it for your shoulders and your best overhead position. It may very likely be that you need to work on your ankles first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can take that back up to the T-spine, which is probably the area right before the shoulders. Would you agree, or would you say that so T-spine before lats?
Yeah, probably rank order of checking the boxes to make sure it's not, you would want to go T-spine, then probably capsular if you have an old injury. And if not, then you start to go down the checklist of muscular tightness. And you make a good point. And the reason this is because weightlifting in particular, and I'm going to be biased to say gymnastics, they demand the most amount of holistic mobility, right? So particularly a snatch. Clean and jerk, you can get away with some things here and there, which is why a lot of people are really great. They love cleaning heavy, but they can't, jerk their weight, or they can't snatch well. A snatch in particular requires extreme mobility of your ankles, your knees, your hips, and your shoulder and T-spine and your wrists all together. Mm-hmm. And the hard thing here is that a lot of different common, what looks like to the naked eye, a problem or a fault in position can be caused by all those things. So say you see someone who snatches with the barbell way far behind them and they're really dumped forward and you're like, I don't think that looks great. That could be a T-spine issue. That could be a shoulder flexibility issue. That could be a hip flexibility issue. That could be an ankle flexibility issue, or that could be just technical and the weight's too heavy. Like, you don't know. And that's why you have to have this checklist in your mind to be like, okay, let's go through the boxes. Is it the ankle? No. Is it the hip? No. Is it the T-spine? Yes. Is it the shoulder? Somewhat. Is it the wrist? No. Okay, let's just focus on the T-spine and that little bit of shoulder and leave the ankles alone, and just do it as part of our warm-up, but not go crazy on it. You have to really be a detective there, because so many people we work with at camp and with every other program, it's crazy how many drills they're doing, thinking that they're at the right pathway for them. But if they just focused on the things that maybe are ruled in with a screen, they would probably save themselves loads of time and effort and money.
Awesome. Well, now that we went off on those tangents, Dave, I can't remember exactly. Exactly where we were, but let's pick up. I think you were talking about getting into the assessments.
Sure. Yep. Exactly. Yep. So you've checked T-spine off the list. You check those things off the list, and you don't have a capsular issue, but you still can't get overhead. And we're not talking about lower body right now. We're just talking on the shoulders.
Right.
Within those 5 muscles, right? So that you have to test for all these muscles, and then you also have to then do something about those muscles, right? So the biggest one priority wise is probably going to be the lat. That's the first thing that a lot of people have problems with. And the way you do this is a lat length test. So you lay on your back and you hug your knees to your chest, and you turn your palms upward because the lats internally rotate. So you want to do the opposite of that to make sure you're in the condition you want. And you try to raise your arms all the way over your head. And if you've done your homework and your T-spine and your neck stiffness is not an issue, you should be able to get your thumbs all the way to touch the ground behind you pretty well. And what happens here is that if you can't do that, or if you're limited, what you do is you then extend your legs straight. And what that does is puts a natural arch back in your lower back. Your lats attach down to your hips around that area of your lower back. It's called the thoracolumbar fascia. So if you straighten your legs out and your arms all of a sudden can then touch the back of the ground, we probably have just ruled in that maybe the lats are a little stiff, because when we change the lower back position, it changes how your arms go overhead. So that would be a way to rule in for you that you have lat flexibility issues probably. Now, if that's a negative test, the next thing you move on to is teres major. And the way you do this test is typically you need someone to help you with this, or you need a medical provider, but you bring your arms over your head laying on your back, and you have somebody do what's called a scap blocked position. So they take their hand and they kind of push in on your shoulder blade, and they try to passively raise your arm overhead. And because the teres major attaches to the shoulder blade, if somebody has really good overhead position without that scap block position, and then you hold that down and you raise somebody overhead, and all of a sudden it's really limited, well, you're tugging on the end of the teres major, and you're saying, what's the flexibility of just this muscle? So we'll do a passive range of motion assessment with a lat length test, and then we'll do another test where we put our scap block position in, and then we've probably ruled in or ruled out the teres major. If you have really limited arm overhead position, so maybe like up to like 140 or 130, that might tell you have a lat teres major flexibility issues. So say you don't have either of those. Say your lat length is really good. Say your scat blocked elevation is really good. The next thing you move on to is probably the pecs. So pec major and pec minor can both limit, particularly the pec major with snatch position, pec minor maybe more with overhead position, narrow grip. But for pec major, you would want to do a horizontal abduction assessment. So essentially bringing your arm out to the side and seeing if it can passively come behind your body tells you the pec length right here. You can also repeat that again, slightly overhead. And if you feel like you have a lot of stretch in your chest and you're very limited, so you can't get your arm down to the table, we may have just ruled in a pec major flexibility problem, which would be maybe why you can't get your overhead position. If that's not on the list, the next thing you move to is pec minor. The way you do this is you actually look from the top down. So someone's laying on their back, you're at the top of their head looking down their body, and you see if their shoulder blades are elevated off the table, right? So your shoulder blade, your coracoid process is this bony bump right in the front of your shoulder on your collarbone. That's where the pec minor attaches. So if you're looking down the barrel of someone's head down body and they have a really rounded, elevated position where their shoulder blades and their shoulders are off the table from the top down, that's probably telling you the pec minors are pulling somebody into a forward rounded position of their shoulder blades where the shoulder blades are tipped in and down. And again, if that's really stiff, you don't have the opposite, which is back and out, which is how your arms get fully overhead. So you would try to see if somebody has a pec minor assessment with that. And then so that's all the way down 4, right? 2 of the same muscle group. And then lastly, you're looking at subscap and triceps, right? Subscap is very specific. If you can't externally rotate at 90 degrees, you might have a subscap stiffness problem. It's very rare to see that in people, but that can sometimes be an issue. You would check that one off the box. And tricep is usually a process of elimination. If you get all the way through that list and nothing else is limited, it could be the long head of your triceps, which attaches down below as well. And you would go overhead and see if someone's elbow would bend or not be able to stay all the way bent overhead behind their body. So that's like your internal checklist of T-spine, no, check. Neck, no, check. Okay, what's next? Lat, teres, pec major, pec minor, subscap, triceps. If you get all the way through that list and someone still does not have what passively on the table is not showing up in the actual lifts or when they do technical work, we have a strength and or a control problem, right? We have a technical issue and a strength deficit. We don't have a passive mobility problem. So that's how you would rule in whether somebody has a passive or, more technical based issue.
Awesome. I love it. And I want to go back and ask you about, I think the first test you were talking about for lat, yeah, you had them lay on their back holding a PVC pipe with an undergrip.
Yep.
Right? Right. And so were you saying that you want their knees up?
Yeah. So you lay on your back,
yeah.
You hug your knees all the way to your chest.
Okay.
Somebody
Gotcha.
possibly put your knees up. Yep.
And that just you're doing that to keep their back from arching so they can't compensate and touch the ground in that way.
Yeah. And what that's doing is by flexing your lower back, you're taking up a lot of slack in the thoracolumbar fascia, which is where the lat's attached to. So you're essentially tugging one side of the lat's taut. And then when you raise your arms over your head, if there's stiffness, you won't be able to bring your arm all the way back to the ground. But then when you straighten your legs out and you arch into a small anterior pelvic tilt, you're releasing the tension in that lat attachment point in their lower back. And if there's an improvement in their shoulder range of motion, you've essentially just shown yourself that you're playing tug of war in the lats, because when you flex your knees, it limits your lat position. And when you extend your knees and your back, it opens up your lat position. That's because you're playing with the attachment point of the lats.
I love that. And it's, one that I use, and I want to ask your opinion on it, is having an athlete set up against a wall with their legs out, if they've got the hamstring flexibility to do that, feet together, making sure that their butt is touching the wall, their back is touching the wall as much as possible, shoulders are touching the wall, and then test with an over grip and an under grip right at about shoulder width. Would you say that effectiveness wise and dummy proof wise, so to speak, is the laying on the ground with the knees tucked a better option?
Yeah, great question. So I think that test came from me and Aaron talking, like that's what I was doing with gymnastics. And Aaron's like, this might be useful too for weightlifters. So maybe that's the roundabout way I got it. But it's a good question, because when you're sitting against gravity and you're going against the wall, that's a comprehensive overall assessment for overhead position to try to figure out whether somebody has an issue or not, right? So when you put your palms backwards, all of these muscles that we talked about, the pec, the lat, the teres major, they're internal rotators. So by palming up, if you've cleared the T-spine, if somebody can't get to the wall, you're putting all of those muscles that are possibly involved here on stretch. So you're probably going to show a limitation. Then if you flip your palms down and it improves, you're kind of further ruling into yourself that something soft tissue wise is the problem here. So the sitting version is a combination of not only passive flexibility, but also active range of motion control too. So your scaps start to get involved. If you get all the way to the wall, you have active flexibility to get that passive range of motion to go all the way back. So we use that as our starting point test, and also to give someone as a marker of progress. The lat length test, when we break somebody down their back, is if they're limited against the wall and we're trying to think in our head, what's the possible reason why? The lat length test is a further challenge on just the lat. So we're using that to see, okay, what's going on into the why they can't touch the wall. But if you have someone, this is a really good bridge back to our previous topic, is if you have someone who can't get to the wall, but then when you test all these passive flexibility things, thoracic spine, cervical spine, all of the muscles like that, and they still can't get to the wall, you are telling yourself this person passively has enough to get to the wall, but they're just actively not able to get there. You'd want to focus on strength of their upper back, some full range of motion control drills like pressing overhead, right? You'd want to focus on getting that person stronger. This tends to happen in people who are a little bit younger, who are really hypermobile, who maybe don't have a lot of training experience with barbell work, and maybe they're not strong enough to maintain that overhead position. So that would be one thing. The third category is like a technical issue. Maybe somebody has passive and active on the ground, but when they put a barbell in their hands, technically they just don't really understand the best way to use that motion. Or, sometimes it's an ego thing where someone's ego gets in the way. They look great at 75 pounds. They look great at 105 pounds. They look terrible at 135 pounds, right? Again, not a passive flexibility or mobility issue. That is a strength and or technique issue that comes down to programming and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, all the tests that you ran through or versions of those tests can actually be seen on vaughnweightlifting.com. That's where my blog is. And of course, I do a lot of collaborations and writing with Dr. Aaron Horschig, who you have worked some with before as well, and had a lot of conversations with, as you said. So at least a lot of those tests, the way that you explain them exactly, are on there, or versions of some of those tests. So go check out those blogs. I mean, we, aside from that, we have bottom position assessments. We're talking about looking at your everything from your feet to your ankle to your tibia up through your T-spine for that. Getting into overhead and front rack positions and assessments for that is where you're going to find these specific tests that Dave was talking about. Dave, do you have any links that we can mention, or videos that we can direct people to for those tests from your perspective?
Yeah, right. We don't want to leave people hanging with like, okay, what do I do about it? Right.
Yeah.
So the way you fix these things is, one, actually is refer to the first podcast, because we talked a lot about, how you would be stretching here. You'd be doing eccentrics and stuff for like your lat or teres major. I do have some YouTube links that go to some tutorials of overhead position and mobility if you want to check that out. Obviously, the stuff that you have in the Barbell Mobility program probably will help people out here, but essentially you're trying to find, in a broad overview, based on what you find, particularly if it's not, when you're talking about T-spine, but for muscular stuff, you're trying to do some sort of soft tissue work, foam rolling, lacrosse ball work to that area, maybe 30 to 60 seconds. You're trying to do some sort of specific stretch for that area. For the lat, it's probably going to be one of our favorites, which is, reverse grip, elbows up on a mat, rounding your T-spine, leaning back to stretch your lats and teres major. For pecs, it's probably going to be some sort of 90-90 or, pec minor stretch. Pec minor, a tabletop stretch is really good. So you're like doing a crab position where your hands are behind you and you're lifting your hips up and trying to open the pec minor, or just hands behind your back and squeezing your shoulder blades together. You can do those as well. Tricep soft tissue stuff, is all the same. You would do some soft tissue work, do some stretching work, and then find the proper eccentric drill and stretching drill that you would need. So lat lowers or chin up lowers for lats and teres major. We do a lot of deficit push-ups on parallettes or plates for someone to do like a 5-second lower if the pecs are really, really stiff, with like a weight on their back with a partner helping out. For triceps, that's also involved too as well. But you would want to find a few soft tissue things to do every day, a few specific stretches for your lats or teres or pecs or whatever, or T-spine, and then some sort of specific eccentric work. And then whatever position you're trying to get into, do some sort of technical drill to solidify that position. So do very light push jerks with a 5-second hold overhead with just the barbell, right? Or do some dumbbell pressing, or do, whatever exercise you're going to work on for the day or what you want to get a better improvement in. You would do some drills from, some people you coached or find out, or things that we have on Power Monkey, to then solidify those positions, and just do 2 rounds of that every single day, 5 to 6 days per week, and then retest against the wall to see if you're making progress.
Perfect. And, to bring the Barbell Mobility program into this, we're talking about the shoulders specifically overhead position, again, we have to remember that the T-spine, the lats, all these areas that Tilly talked about are a part of the shoulder. They're supporting the shoulder. And again, we can take that all the way back to the ankle, as we've said before, but specifically talking about that overhead position and what you're going to see in the barbell mobility program. The most important thing I think that you're going to see are just you getting into exaggerated positions. And what that's going to be is a catch-all, meaning that wherever you're most limited in your overhead position, by exaggerating your overhead position, that is by nature going to be worked. And again, that's going to be combined with stuff like lat stretching or tricep smashing, pec smashing, or pec stretching, and again, we could go on and on and on. There's so many, really a lot of different drills that you can do for those specific areas. But in general, I believe no matter what your major area of limitation is, as you said, Dave, you need to be pairing that with some sort of movement, and to move into an exaggerated position, to me, is the best thing that you can do. So one of the ways that we do that is with something like a lat box stretch or a T-spine box stretch, as you mentioned, Dave. That's an exaggerated position, putting your elbows up on the box, holding with a reverse grip or with an over grip. The over grip, you're going to want to arch your back, and let's see. No, I'm wrong there. I think we want to do under grip all the time on that one. Yeah. Always under grip there, but
round.
Yeah, rounding is going to be your lat, and then arching your back is going to hit your T-spine a little bit more. So we do T-spine box stretches, or T-spine box, what I call arm pumps, where you're getting into that arch position and straightening and bending your arms. That's an exaggerated position, but known as a mobility drill in a stretch. Another way that I love to exaggerate the overhead position is to hold the bar with an under grip, go behind your neck, and do what I call just simply behind the neck press and stretch. So you're going to press straight up and hold the bar directly over the top of your head for a few seconds, and then push the bar back as much as you can to get into that exaggerated position. Now with that, you need to make sure that your quads are flexed, your glutes are flexed, your abs are crunched down, really exaggerating towards a hollow position so you can get a better stretch on those lats. We can do the same thing with an over grip, with a regular grip, trying to bring those hands in more and more narrow to exaggerate the position as well. So exaggerating the position. I mean, I think I'm going to talk about exaggerated positions and methods on every single barbell mobility recording that I do, because it is so much of what the program is, and the way that athletes can benefit from this program that is general is you're getting into your key positions, your regular key positions, your exaggerated key positions, and easier positions. And again, we make those easier by simply elevating your heels and other things that we can do to make that happen. But another thing that you talked about in all that, Dave, is that if you go through all these assessments and you don't see any issues, but there's still compensation, then we're starting to talk about a strength and technique issue. And what I want to say about the barbell mobility program with that is that, because we're having you say one of these simple exercises that we'll do is, or combinations, is a behind the neck press and stretch, like I talked about, with a reverse grip or an over grip. And then the next exercise is simply a behind the neck strict press. And with that behind the neck strict press, or even regular press, you're going to do, say, 3 to 5 reps, but then the indication is to hold overhead on the last rep for 10 to 15 seconds. So that hold, even though you've got light weight on there, bar or a little bit of weight, is going to head towards stability and strengthening your upper body, your shoulders, your upper back for that specific position. Or doing overhead squats. Any squat that you do in this program is going to have a pause in it. So, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe even longer. But by simply holding those positions, the position in itself, holding it, it's going to lead towards stability and strength. So to strengthen it to its maximum potential, do you need to have more weight on there? Yes, eventually. But first and foremost, we need the mobility and the range of motion to get to the best position. We then need some time and reps with lighter weights to begin the ingraining and strengthening process to get you to the point to where you can load more and more weight on there. And that's what the barbell mobility program is going to offer you. And also technique, because we are slowing you down and making you hold these positions, which is going to lend to better technique for yourself as well.
Yep. Couldn't agree more, man. Crushed it. Hit the nail on the head.
Awesome. Well, I think you and I talk about these things all the time. So I think we end up with the ability to explain things well, and hopefully it comes across that way. But Dave, I think we can wrap it up with where we're at here. Certainly appreciate the info that you provided once again. And this is the second recording we've done now. I think we're probably going to have to do another one that's more specific to front rack. But I will say, and I'm sure you'll agree that a lot of what we talked about for overhead position and shoulder and T-spine and lats are going to relate 100% to your front rack position as well. I think there's a few more specific things for that position. But as a whole, I think that really does a good job of covering the front rack position as well. Would you agree?
Yeah. I'd say probably 75 to 80% of what we talked about today is probably going to be a catch-all for the front rack too. And like you said, a couple of weird little nuances because of the way the shoulder is positioned, but generally, yes, you're probably in a very similar bucket.
Awesome. Well, before we get off here, like I said in the last recording, I always like to have a last question that is just for the guest specifically, that is a little different maybe than what we talked about before. But of the key positions that we address and we work on constantly in the barbell mobility program, we're talking about bottom position, we're talking about start position, front rack, and overhead. Are there any of those four that you struggle with more than the other?
Yeah, probably. I would say probably overhead is probably the one that catches up to me the most because I have pretty good natural hip mobility. So squatting and the hinging position is decent for me. But I'm very much a victim of that, what I talked about, which is I did gymnastics my whole life and I do a lot of like barbell work still. So I'm constantly in an uphill battle to just make sure that my lats and like my soft tissue is staying pretty mobile. So I'm constantly working on my overhead position, in warm ups and drills and stuff like that.
Awesome. And I'm curious that you say that because I was interested to see how you were going to answer that, because I know I've seen you move, I've seen you lift, I've seen you do gymnastics, and I know that you have really good overall mobility. I would say probably some of the best from gymnasts that I've seen, and gymnasts are known to be very flexible, to be very mobile. But to be honest, a lot of the gymnasts that I've seen at Power Monkey Camp and that I've come across are really pretty tight. And I think that stems from what you're talking about, getting into some of these positions and the actions that you're doing in a repetitive fashion over years. And one of those areas is actually the shoulders and the overhead position. Dave is actually really flexible there. Dave Durante is actually really flexible there because he does so much handstand and he does get into exaggerated positions, and he works on that specific position so much that his front rack and his overhead are great, you know. But I was interested to see how you would answer that. And being that you feel overhead position is the most limited for you, is there one or two actions from gymnastics that you think contributed to that most?
Yeah. So I was, I think the twisting of gymnastics, when you wrap to twist and skills, sometimes you pull really hard inward, and that's like a lot of lat activation. It's a lot of that, but also just, 4 out of the 6 events for men's gymnastics are very shoulder and lat dominant. So parallel bars, high bar, rings, and pommel horse, they have a lot of demand on the shoulders. So I think by nature, you get that repetitive action more versus in the female gymnastics side where I treat, it's typically their hips. That's usually what's more the soft tissue of their quads, their adductors, their calves, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a common, I learned this from Mike Ronald and Lenny from Champion in baseball, is that a lot of hypermobile athletes can be loose and tight at the same time, loose jointed, but tight muscularly. And that's something that was a huge eye opener for me that I transferred into the gymnastics world, and it's changing now. But we're seeing this in the weightlifting CrossFit community as well. And Dave's a really good example. And many other people are, is that you can still get soft tissue stiffness from repetitive overuse and be capsular wise joint laxity. And it's actually a really bad problem we see, because what happens is the joint capsules start to stretch out more because they're loose to make up for the differences that people don't have in soft tissue flexibility, which causes some movement of the shoulder that's uncomfortable and some lever rotator cuff stuff. So yeah, it's a constant education point that I have. And for me, knowing from gymnastics how that caught up with me, I luckily have really good T-spine mobility, but my shoulder soft tissue is constantly something I work on all the time because I still do a lot of handstands training and also barbell work. So if I don't properly take care of the soft tissue, do my cuff exercises, do a lot of upper back pulling to keep my scap strong, I start to feel my shoulders bug me a little bit and I get some problems. And it's kind of like, it's almost like a non-negotiable for me that if I do any upper body work, I have to go through a really good, progressive warm-up program.
Yeah. Well, that's also interesting in what it leads me to think and what I want to ask you with that. And we're kind of just going too far with this, but that's okay. I would say that your handstand work and the handstand, repetitions and things that you want to do in a handstand still are being benefited just by simply doing barbell work. And
I would agree.
You would agree with that. So it just because you're getting repetitions, I would say the barbell we can say is maybe a little bit of an exaggeration of what a handstand is. And I believe the same is true vice versa. A weightlifter that is a sport specific weightlifter is going to benefit in position, strength, stability, mobility by getting into a handstand, because it's something that's a little bit different. The position is going to be at least slightly different. So it's going to, I guess, encapsulate you as an athlete a little bit more completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a good, back and forth. You can make the discussion between weightlifting and gymnastics. Actually, Aaron has reached out to me and wants to do more handstand drills and stuff to benefit his overhead position. So I've talked to him about that. But also, again, hate name dropping, but some very, very high level weightlifters that you and I are friends with and work with have wanted more accessory work for gymnastics and handstand positions because they feel as though it makes their stack jerk position much more comfortable. And it's a good way to add more capacity to their overhead position without adding stress of weight and kilos, right? So it's a good way to kind of balance this. But there's also the second layer, which is something I'm a huge fan, passionate of, is the fact that gymnasts should be using hybrid weightlifting programs in barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells to augment their gymnastics training. That is another thing we see like a huge change happening in gymnastics right now is young kids starting to do some weight training to benefit some of their floor forces and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely something we're seeing change at a pretty blistering pace.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's definitely a lot more weightlifters that either have done a decent amount of gymnastics training in the past, and they've gotten into weightlifting through CrossFit and through gymnastics and everything else like that. And honestly, like you can just see the benefit that they got from that undoubtedly. And a couple great examples, Harrison Morris and Hampton Morris. They're not related. Their last names are spelled differently, but Harrison was a gymnast before he was a weightlifter, and he just went to the Olympics and killed it, got fourth place. Potentially we'll end up with a medal when the drug test results got, I don't even remember who he competed against, so I shouldn't say that, but Hampton Morris, if you watch him, and he's a barbell mobility ambassador, he's a great example. This kid is killing it. World, I think he's got a couple world records, many national records, youth world championship, all those kind of things. And if you watch his Instagram, he is constantly doing accessory work, not just the lifts, but a part of that accessory work, he does a lot of handstand holds. I think he does that, if I remember correctly, at least like 3 days a week, getting into that position. And certainly, I mean, there's no way that you can't say that those things haven't benefited him. Now as a potential, he's just a freak and it doesn't matter what he does. Yeah, I guess, but I don't believe that. I think a lot of his success has to do with the accessory work that he's doing, and he's doing stuff on the side of his Olympic lifting program. But Dave, before we go too far with this, I mean, we could do a whole other episode on just talking about this stuff, and maybe we'll come back and do that, along with, I'd love to talk to you more about the front rack as well, but we'll go ahead and get off here. Thank you so much once again for your time and for the information that you shared.
Yeah, buddy. Always a pleasure. Happy to be here.